Hello, I'm John Grom, and this is the Right and Left Discussion Forum. Right and Left is a nonprofit corporation committed to the promotion of civil political discourse. Our sole purpose is to urge voters to become a more insistent voice in the political process, demanding respectful dialogue and a commitment to finding common ground. During our most recent political campaign, social media sites, letters to the editor, and other forums were loaded with insulting comments aimed at both political parties. It was obvious that people on each side hold very negative stereotypes of the other. According to psychologist Jonathan Haidt, we have a tendency towards something he calls groupishness. We form groups or join groups based on some commonality, and we see ourselves as different from others, and over time we magnify the differences. We show favoritism toward the members of our group and perceive others as not like us, all the same, and inferior. We look for negative qualities to assign to other groups. For instance, if we observe racist behavior in one member, we are eager to label the entire group as racist. Over time, we fashion a matrix of negative beliefs about other groups that are not accurate, and we let these beliefs shape our perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors. Our panel is going to discuss some of the stereotypes that people on the right and the left have of each other and the ways in which they affect relationships. Our panel today begins with Dr. Ron Chamberlin. Ron is a retired research chemist. On his left is Mike Kovack. Mike is our current Medina County auditor. On his left is Jerry Ritzman, vice president and partner of Ritzman Pharmacies. I'd like to start the discussion with Ron Chamberlin. Ron, we just came through a number of political campaigns where negative stereotypes were employed to put candidates and their party in the worst possible light. As a Democrat, I'm sure you're sensitive to some of the ways that Democrats have been portrayed. What stereotypes do you find particularly objectionable, and how do you deal with them?
Well, John, I'm glad you asked the question that way. If you'd asked me to think of the stereotypes that I feel about Republicans, I'd have been tempted to bring out my inner Bill Maher, or at the very least my inner George Carlin, I think. But well, there are a number of them, and unfortunately the stereotypes, they don't apply completely to an individual or to a group, as you've implied in your beginning thing here. This groupish thing is psychology 101 in a way, where we all identify with a particular group, and I identify with the Democrat, with the liberal point of view. And I think the one thing that bothers me the most, me personally as well as being a Democrat, is the tree-hugging, starry-eyed liberal. You know, when I hear this kind of thing, when I express my concern about environmental issues or about various other sorts of social issues, such as Planned Parenthood, all that whole gamut of things, and people say, my Republican friends say, "Well, no, you're just being too altruistic here, too starry-eyed, too nebulous," and I figure I'm a reasonably intelligent individual, spent a lot of time in school. Not that means too much. But I feel that I've looked through some of these issues and find that the belief in individual rights guaranteed by group action, that is government, is very important to me. And if I find that's vilified, it bothers me.
Mm-hmm. Jerry, you tend to be a Republican.
Tend that way, yes.
I think you're probably more a middle-of-the-road kind of a guy.
Yeah.
But when you see stereotypes that Democrats have of Republicans, are there some in particular that you can highlight?
Yeah, John, I really appreciate this opportunity to have the chance to speak for my redneck, gun-toting,
knuckle dragging?
Well, redneck, gun-toting, uncompassionate, homophobic, anti-feminist brethren. Because We who cling to our rifles and our religion often don't get a good chance to come out and speak about how we feel about our group. And you notice I said my brethren, because we don't feel at all that there's anything of value to be offered from the opposite sex. Because, we are quite anti-feminist and
I want to know where you live because I don't want to be anywhere near this.
So we appreciate that, that we are us natural resource ravaging, us NASCAR following group of Neanderthals.
Could we get back to stereotypes and get away from the philosophy of the Republican Party?
Us monosyllabic Neanderthals.
Do you bathe in shale oil?
Well,
Wow,
I appreciate
he's
the
prepared.
opportunity to say that. Yeah.
You left out homophobic.
Well,
Oh, no,
I
it
did.
was there.
It was there also. Yeah, that was it.
Misogynistic, racist, homophobic.
Oh, so I left
the
out
triple
racist. I
threat.
left out racist. Yes, yeah, and uncompromising, of course. Yeah, right.
And no sense of humor.
Right, yeah, very grim. We're very grim, and so I do appreciate the opportunity to be on this program today.
We're going to circle around to some of that a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
But if Mike can quit laughing, he's going to chime in here.
He wins. I tell you what. So I was just going to say I'm disappointed with the way the bastardization of the word liberal has come about. But he went down the whole gamut there. But something to keep in mind too. I mean, the reason that these are used in the political setting, and again, I think we're more talking a philosophical than not, but the reason they're used in politics is because negatives are much easier to put over than positives, and that's psychology 101 too. It's much easier to turn people against something than to pull a group together to push in one direction, which of course has been the problem of government through the ages. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But he spent some time looking over the different stereotypes there. Very impressive, Jerry.
I guess that, I'll chime in on the right side. Excuse me, not as correct, but the right here just a little bit. One of the things that troubles me about stereotypes is that they do get in the way of honest discussion. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say things like, I never watch Fox News because it's so slanted. Well, the other question is,
Did you ever watch Keith Olbermann?
I don't watch MSNBC either, but I know it's filled with misinformation. But we stop listening to each other once we've accepted the stereotypes, and we just look at where it comes from. And I've had conversations with people before and would make a comment, well, where did you hear that? Well, it was in a paper done by the Heritage Foundation. Oh, well, you can just go ahead and write that off because it doesn't really mean anything. But we have the problem of putting each other into these boxes that are really not accurate. They all have a little bit of truth to them, or there wouldn't be the stereotype in the first place. For instance, I don't think there's any doubt that liberals or Democrats, I'm not sure what to call Democrats anymore. Liberals
Democrats
or progressive.
Winners.
I don't think there's any doubt that there's a higher feeling level, a concern for individuals on the left than there is a right. The right seems to be more oriented toward authority and structure and so forth, and the left seems to be more oriented toward feelings and people and helpfulness and so forth. Whether the helpfulness is helpful is another matter.
Whether the leaders are leading in the right direction.
The authority is correct.
However, how do you, when you're dealing with people on a day in and day out basis, where you've got these different sides, these different stereotypes, how do you get around that in discussing something? How do you?
But I don't. These things don't come up in ordinary life. I mean, I had dealing with campaigns this last time, dealing with some candidates, you got to remember that most people don't care about you, don't care. They get home from work after 8 hours a day, they got kids to deal with, they got shopping to do. Really, your political commercials, your thoughts don't really enter into their mindset that much, which may be part of the problem. But that's why in political campaigns you go to these sound bites, because you're trying to capture people's attention in short spans. So, but in daily life, I could care less whether you're Republican or Democrat. It makes no difference to me at all. It's how we interact. So, it's artificial when we get into political campaigns and such.
It came up for me during the 2008 campaign with a friend. I didn't know her very well, but she was suffering from some sort of mysterious illness, and she was involved in the whole healthcare issue. And we went back and forth. I would send her articles. She said, "Oh, well, I can't accept that. That was written by the New York Times or the Washington Post. I can't accept that."
Yeah, gotcha.
And this time, a couple of relatives, I think I alluded to that in our last discussion on Facebook, where they would make comments that I realized were coming from a stereotypical view, and try to get a discussion going in there, and it didn't work very well.
Yeah, Ron, most of those discussions take place with people that agree with you, right? I mean, discussions of the political or philosophical. I think we have a tendency to want to discuss that with people who support our opinion. Very rarely is there a true objective discussion between people that have opposing views. And most of those discussions that are taking place out in the public escalate to the name calling and so forth that we're trying to counteract. One interesting thing is that I think it happens that, overall the country will say, the members of Congress, they're a bunch of scoundrels owned by the lobbyists and the big corporations. Let's throw them all out, except the guy that represents me. And, that somewhat can apply to us here. When I get to look at somebody that has maybe more liberal views than I do, I find out that, they're not such bad guys after all. So
their horns are smaller than you thought.
That's right. So,
but I think there are everyday issues that come up where you can almost predict the sides that people are going to fall on. You mentioned global warming. And there are some people that are absolutely, totally, 100% convinced that the science says it's caused by anthropomorphic CO2, man-made CO2.
And methane.
And methane. And there are other people say that the data is just not there to support that. And I don't want to get into a discussion about the percentage of greenhouse gas.
Can you see the flame starting?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
But also, I think that you could tell when the Trayvon Martin case became national news that there was one side that was going to decide this was absolutely a racist killing, and the other side was going to say we don't have enough information. Let's wait for the trial. And you know how it's going to divide like that. And that's the thing that I find very, very difficult, because people do make up their minds over a broad scope of situations, and they're immovable.
No, I'm not sure about that. And then again, that's human nature too. I think you're going to have that no matter what. But and I hate to bring this back to my pet peeve, or I don't. But in the political realm, we have really gotten to the point where the people we are sending to represent us are more divided.
Yes.
And I think they have bully pulpits. And so we're getting more people from the farther right and the farther left. And I believe that's a problem. That comes back to the redistricting. There was just a story in that liberal rag, I think it may have been the New York Times, it may not have been, about that it singled out Ohio and North Carolina as the worst gerrymandering in the nation.
I saw that.
And it really is true. And there was a follow-up story, I don't know where it was, but it talked about in 1982, after the last redistricting that the Democrats controlled, the Democrats won the vote 52 to 48, and they won 56% of the seats in the Ohio House and Senate. This 2012, after this redistricting, the Republicans won 52% of the vote, Democrats 48. Republicans won 75% of the seats in the Ohio House and Senate. And worse than that, they weren't competitive races. So, and the problem is, if I don't believe as an elected official I'm answerable to the voters, what's my behavior going to be? That's psychology 101 too. If you have no ramifications for what you do, what are you going to do? Well, some people will do the right thing, but a large percentage will use that to their benefit, and that is a clear problem here in Ohio, I think, and throughout the country. And I think that adds to the stereotypes that we get, because we've got people in authority staking out positions which I think are extreme.
Heard a lecture by Jim Wallace, the founder of Sojourners. He said of all of the legislators he knew in Washington, about a half a dozen were really trying to do the right thing, rather than just what their constituency asked them to do.
Yeah. Mike, do you think that a politician in an active campaign has a powerful temptation to adhere to the at least their opinion of what the stereotypes are?
Well, that's, I mean, and that depends. I mean, that's a broad spectrum. Political campaigns are a specific marketing problem. I mean, really, that's what it breaks down to. How do you best present yourself or your argument to win the most votes? So, and again, from national advertising or even party advertising, it's much easier to turn people against something than it is to bring us all together on a common point. So,
It's common for politicians during the course of a campaign to be asked questions that have absolutely nothing to do with the office that they're involved in. And say you're out giving a speech, you're running for the county auditor, and somebody says, "Where do you stand on gay marriage?"
it happens all the time. So,
and you feel that, I mean, you have to answer that in the way that's consistent with your Democrat philosophy?
No, not at all. In fact, typically I'd say that has nothing, I'm sorry,
Nothing.
that's nothing that I've given much thought to in the pursuit of this office,
Did you get away with that?
No. Oh, yeah. I mean, again, it has no bearing on what I do.
Sure.
And typically someone who's asking that question has a very, they want to use that is a reason to turn someone against you. I mean, those people who are asking those questions in a public forum are typically trying to make a point rather than really discern answers, I believe.
Yeah. That's not true just in politics. I've been
in
lots of
business,
scientific meetings
yes.
when someone who
Business
will ask the question in the form of the statement of what they believe rather than what you believe.
Yeah.
I saw something the other day that I thought was the absolute epitome of the stupid question being asked of a politician. Marco Rubio was in some type of a discussion. I don't remember what the circumstances were. And he was asked a gotcha question, and the question was considered to have enough substance to make national news. Here's the question. Senator Rubio, how old is the Earth?
Oh, I saw that. I saw that on
Well,
the
that's a
internet
creationist issue. Creationist versus evolutionary issue.
He said it's pretty old.
About 6 billion years, I think, is the latest estimate.
Well, not if you're a fundamentalist Christian. It's only a couple thousand.
That's
I
right.
think.
Well, and that again, that was a question asked by someone trying to make a point.
Sure.
I mean, that's
Sure.
exactly just
Absolutely
like someone
so.
who would ask, the other way. That's there's no doubt why that question was asked. Yes.
Is there a way, though, to get around these stereotypes and disarm them? I think I'm thinking from a point of view of a Sunday school class. I've been teaching one for about 40 years. And we've actually had, over time, and over the last 40 years, I've seen things change radically. We talked about that during our last discussion. And that people have left the class because they just could not stand what other people were saying. And it didn't fit their proper stereotype. But it's to me, in that kind of an environment, questions like global warming and racism and so forth are everyday kinds of questions.
Well, and I think it depends upon the environment you're in too. Hopefully, your environment in the Sunday school class is much more welcoming and.
It was.
It was, yeah. So because from certainly an intellectual and educational standpoint, you certainly want to deal with people who have views different than your own.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we stop that, well, there's no advancement, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's the problem we run into politics when we become so polarized. If you stake out this ideology here and this ideology here, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
There's not only no movement towards the problem, but there's no progression towards better answers. Which,
Well, we've got Marx's synthesis and antithesis, but we don't have our thesis and antithesis, but we don't have synthesis. And unless you can sit down and reason it out, you won't.
Well, but then when somebody does have that discussion, let's say a politician, and changes a position, then the extreme ones are saying that he or she is wishy-washy. And
Yes.
they're, how can we trust this person who, after some thoughtful consideration, changes a position?
Foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, I believe someone smarter than I once said. So,
Now it's going to bother me the rest of the day to remember who said that.
Henry David Thoreau, I believe.
Did
I
he
believe
really?
you're right.
Yeah.
I'll double check.
He was a tree hugger, right?
He was a tree hugger.
That's
It
true.
really was, yeah. This past election, and looking at things on Facebook, something struck me, that there are people on the left and people on the right that don't really try to win somebody over to their point of view. They're not trying to convince anyone of anything. They just want to call them bad names. I would look at somebody's comment and say, "Are you trying to win me over with that?"
That's true.
That insult just really bothers me.
Yeah.
But
I
it's-
was bothered by, I was listening to Governor Kasich's State of the State, and he mentions, says those wackadoodles in California. Now, I have a lot of liberal friends in California, and I don't consider them wackadoodles.
Do you have any conservative friends in California? Are
I
they?
do.
No,
I
no,
have
a lot of liberal
numerous
friends.
conservative friends in California. So, yeah.
Well, I think that we probably got a lot of work to do if we're going to try to have an impact on preventing stereotypes from interfering with honest communication with people. And I think that's one of the things that Right and Left is about more than anything else, is to get people talking to each other and evaluating based on information and data what our stands are, rather than being blinded by our opinion of somebody else. I think that we have some of these issues that we apply religious fervor to them, and that we're not going to be moved off of our opinion because it would be going against this ingrained doctrinaire that we've got.
That's
going
exactly
on.
right, religious fervor. Paul Tillich, the theologian active in the 50s and early 60s, said that everybody has their ultimate concern, and I think he was right there, whether it be politics or whatnot. We also have a whole lot of intermediate concerns that come to the fore in situations like this, so that we get heavily invested in them because that's the most important thing to us at that particular time. So it's hard to shift your direction away from that, whatever it might be. In my case, it's things like global warming and evolution.
Okay, Bill, can you come over to my house someday? We'll talk about that. We've got a few minutes left, and I would like to throw out the ultimate stereotype. In fact, two of them. Liberals are headless hearts, and conservatives are heartless heads.
That's what I said at the beginning. And what Jerry said.
Do you really think that applies, where the liberals are the feeling people, the emotional people, the people that are the ones that really care about what happens to other folks, and that the conservatives do not? They are
The problem with it is,
heartless.
stereotypes, as you mentioned earlier, have some element of truth in them. But we're all a whole mix of these things. Or each of us, a whole mix of these things. And we have to
Yes.
get below the surface to find that out.
And I was just going to say, I might contest, I think most of us are not liberals and conservatives to begin with. I think,
yes,
I
you're
think
right.
that's part of the problem. So even those terms stereotype the conversation, because I think the vast majority of people are neither, and so would consider themselves moderate. But it's easier for us to categorize, liberal and conservative. So, yes.
And someone who may have a history of approaching situations from a different perspective or point of view, that's going to change over their lifetime as they have different
Absolutely.
experiences and so forth. And so it is tough to try and pigeonhole somebody
Yeah.
in there, because hopefully we will change based upon what our experiences are, not just our philosophy.
One would hope.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
There's a lot of discussion going on these days because we're about, 50 years into the war on poverty, and some examination about just exactly what it has achieved, because the poverty rate is actually right now 2 points higher than it was when the war on poverty was launched, but this is a different economic time. But the argument has always been that to just do a sort of a feedlot type of assistance to people who are poor without having some type of a responsibility for elevating them, and should the objective of compassion be to put somebody on their own 2 feet or take care of them forever. Those discussions are going to be going on, I think, as we evaluate the $3 trillion that we've spent. I want to thank you guys again. Sorry that Sharon couldn't be here. Sharon was had an emergency come up that she had to deal with, but I want to thank the panel, and I want to thank the audience for joining us, and we hope what you saw was a change from the contentious rhetoric that's become so common in political discussions. Our goal is to show that reasonable people can have reasonable discussions about potentially contentious topics. It takes discussions like this to peel away the layers of false information that form the basis of too many relationships. We hope you found this program thought-provoking and will join us in future right and left discussions. To learn more about Right and Left Incorporated, please visit our temporary website at rightandleft.org. That's rightandleft.org. To become a volunteer or make a monetary contribution to this nonprofit corporation, contact me, John Grom, at 330-336-2213. And thank you again for joining us.